Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today. We have a very exciting webcast today on creating great developer experiences. We also have a special guest from Palomar Specialty Insurance to walk us through their experience of building APIs and building great developer experiences. Before we get started, some logistics. This is the screen that you would see, and if you wanted to ask any questions, use the Q&A box. We also have a list of resources for you to learn more about this topic in the resources list, so feel free to use that. With that, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speakers. With us today, we have Marsh Gardner, who's the product manager on Apigee Developer Portal, as well as Britt Morries, who is the Chief Technology Officer at Palomar Specialty Insurance. With that, Marsh, take it away.
Great. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Thanks, Rustam, for the introduction, and thank you, Britt, for coming on this webinar. Today, we'll cover why you build great developer experiences in the first place. What's the rationale behind that? We'll talk about Palomar Specialty, their insurance company, and Britt Morries, their CTO, will be explaining how they embarked on their journey for their API program and how they use Apigee and developer portals to deliver their APIs to their customers. We'll come back after we talk to Britt about Palomar Specialty and cover the basic fundamentals of creating a great developer experience, great API products, fantastic developer portal, a strong enablement strategy, and then we'll talk a little bit about how that gets built. So this is the age of the API-driven businesses. APIs are used to power new business channels. They enable entire ecosystems around APIs. They accelerate innovation. They increase IT productivity, and they can deliver an omni-channel customer experience. In the 9 years that I've been at Apigee, I've seen this wave that's affected a whole spectrum of businesses, from large all the way down to small, everything from 100-year institutions that are adapting to this new business model, to how small companies can up-level their business. Behind all of this is how you create this ecosystem around your APIs and the things that enterprises need to do in order to create those great developer experiences. The first step is to build a great API product. You may think that the moment you've wired all this up and you have all these APIs available, that that's it, you're done. But no, that's it. To me, that's just the point at which your work begins. Right now, it's your job to take these products that you've created and get them into your consumers properly. So while publishing is this major milestone in the lifecycle of a product, you're just at the start of this. And that's what brings us today to Britt and to Palomar and their API journey. So if you tuned into a past webcast, we talked about how API programs grow over time and sort of the different product management skills that are required at different stages of this. And this can range everything from your API program audience can be a large set of unknown developers, where you don't actually know each of the people who are using your APIs, all the way down to the small set of known developers. And the different sort of skills that you need on the product management side range from discovering, like finding that product market fit, all the way through to hyper-optimizing your conversion rates. Britt, I think it's safe to say that you're sort of in this dark blue area. You're in the discovery phase working with a small set of known developers. Can you tell us a bit about Palomar and your business?
Yeah, for sure. So a little bit about Palomar. We're an admitted carrier that provides catastrophe insurance for personal and commercial properties with a focus on earthquake, all-risk, wind and flood exposures. The company was founded in 2014. We're based out of La Jolla, California, and we have just over 60 full-time employees. We consider ourselves to be the go-to partner with catastrophe-related insurance, and we have 20-plus carrier partnerships across all of our different lines of business. We're rated AM Best. We're admitted in 24 states. We think our differentiation is that we're innovative and agile, and we meet underserved segments of the market. We collaborate with our producers to develop products that address consumer coverage, objections, and thereby expand the market. For this particular Apigee project, we had a team of two, but there was a full journey that got us to where we are today. We utilize a distribution channel where we distribute our product through our carriers, through our partners. Our initial project that we started was we were implementing a new enterprise underwriter and policy management system. We went with a rules engine-based BPMS low-code platform called Pega. as we were stepping through that, we were noticing that there was a bunch of money that was coming into the insurance vertical, and there's been a lot of funding going to insurtech startups over the past few years, actually. A lot of that funding that was coming into that vertical was just like other verticals, was into API integration startups. And what that was doing was enabling these old insurance systems to integrate and communicate with one another. And it also spawned a couple of types of companies that we refer to as integrators and aggregators. And then while the new money was coming into the insurtech startups, the existing companies, the existing carriers, MGAs, MGUs, wholesalers, were also investing into their own innovation. They're creating innovation departments, innovation teams, and launching new products. So we felt it was the perfect time to start looking at getting into the API game. So what we did is we did an initial POC around developing a rating engine and then exposing that engine via web service on our new platform. We were able to develop that proof of concept in less than a day. It took about 4 hours. Once we had the ability, so it's like, okay, we have a proven proof of concept, then we got the necessary executives and product managers into a room, and we had an API strategy brainstorming session. From that, we developed our strategy statement, our vision statement, and a roadmap for going forward. Our vision was to build the best catastrophe insurance product and connect that product to the market by integrating with our partners. And our strategy was to implement an offering that would enable our partners to rate, quote, bind, settle payments, including payment plans, and issue policies across all of our lines of business and regions by integrating with their systems in the easiest and most effective way possible. So we took an API-first approach. Spent a little bit more time polishing up our proof of concept, putting together some integration materials, et cetera. Created a beta release, and then we released that beta with a very strategic partner. So then we were up and off and running. So now we had a beta release with this strategic partner. We had great momentum, and we just kept running with it. While we were moving forward with that beta product, we knew that we had, in order to take this out to the masses, we had to take it to the next level, and we started searching for an API management service provider partner. We did our homework. We identified what we were looking for. We needed something that was secure. We didn't want to expose our systems, our platforms, web services later, directly to the internet. We needed versioning. We needed the ability to version our API gateway, so we didn't get stuck with any sort of unnecessary deployment support scenarios. And so easy deployment was important to us too as well. Of course, it had to be cloud ready, redundant, fault tolerant, those sorts of things. Scalability was also incredibly important, and then caching for speed, and then the ability to also rate limit and have some sort of queuing if we were to hit any sort of spikes. Just kind of as a note, once we started detailing out our roadmap and we were stepping through our sequencing diagrams of our APIs, we identified it fairly quickly that the proxy feature was also going to be super important to us, and that has been pivotal in our development process. So we did our research. We reviewed the Gartner report. We met with 3 vendors from the leader quadrant. The first vendor that we contacted, we didn't get past the first call. Basically, they were like, we were too small. There just wasn't a fit for them. Second vendor we contacted, we had a couple of meetings with them. We stepped through a demo, received a quote, and the initial investment was just huge. So the third vendor, Apigee, we looked at the website. We signed ourselves up online, and our senior architect, Mark, had us up and running in about a day and a half with the beta product. So we could have saved ourselves a ton of time. But now, while we were in the process of identifying and selecting our API management vendor, we were still up and running on our beta product off of our existing enterprise service layer. So we kept moving forward with those partner integrations to keep the momentum going, to keep the adoption going. And what we found, this was an interesting thing that we came across that we didn't initially expect, is that getting the integration meeting scheduled with our partners, with our existing partners and our potential new partners, that wasn't the difficult part. They were incredibly open to the concept, but getting the information across, getting the details across was very time-consuming, especially when you consider who you need to corral into these meetings from the partner perspective. So you're going to have the partner's business sponsor, you're going to have their product manager, you're going to have their project manager, and you're going to have a development resource. And what we were finding is it would take us about 3 meetings to get that information across, and three meetings that would take about an hour each. And because you had to corral so many different resources into the meeting, it would usually take at least 3 weeks to get that partner up to speed about the integration that we were working with them on. So once Ivan and Mark, our senior architect and our BA, had our APIs deployed and released into the Apigee environment, they immediately set up the developer portal. And then after we set up the developer portal, we would kick off those integration meetings where Ivan would just open up the developer portal, and what used to take us about 3 weeks and 3 one-hour sessions, we would be able to step through those meetings in about 15 minutes. And we would receive typical responses from the development resources on the other side of, "This makes complete sense, no additional questions, thanks." So we turned 3 weeks into about 15 minutes. Another takeaway from those meetings is that by having the developer portal set up and configured properly, you were able to gain a high level of confidence from the partners on your product in a very short period of time, just by having a well-documented, easy-to-use portal. I think the last takeaway, and the biggest one for us, is from this entire journey, is that it has effectively changed the way that we are utilizing our distribution partners going forward. It's giving us access to new partners like the integrators and the aggregators that we weren't playing in before, but it also gives us the ability to market to a different type of company. Instead of what we used to do historically is that we would be reaching out to an office of agents. So say in like Oklahoma, for example, where we would call on agents, we would call on an office of agents for a few weeks. We would get them to agree to a sales presentation. We would present our product. They would agree to sell it. We would give them the marketing materials. We would train them, and we'd train up an office of like 10 folks. Now we have the ability to work with larger partners, larger distribution models, where we can integrate directly into their existing workflows, into their existing screens, into their existing applications, and we can turn up hundreds to thousands of agents all at once, very easy and efficiently.
Oh, great. Thanks for the overview. There are a lot of themes I think we'll return to in your discussion of the journey. Let's start with these great API developer experiences require, first and foremost, a great API product, and start with one and then grow it from there. Developers are the users of your API products. It's really important to understand their business need and their use cases to shape your API product strategy. But it sounds like you'd identified this business need, but I think the next step was to validate. And from what you've explained, I think this means that you had a strategic partner already identified, and you were able to work with them to craft the product that they needed to do that kind of integration. Is that accurate?
We actually had the concept first, and we developed the proof of concept. We took that to the strategy team, and then as we were working with the strategy team, with the executives and the product managers and owners and marketing, they came up with a partner right away. They're like, this would be perfect for this partner.
That makes a lot of sense. And often that's the best way to find those insights is from the other people in the organization. I think one thing that jumps out also from your story, we've seen when people make mistakes in this first step, it's often that they're approaching it as if they have a project mindset, like we're going to build this API and then we're done, we're going to go figure out what to do next. But this is much more, and I think you managed to not fall into this trap. You began by thinking about this as a product that you launch and then you support and make it successful along the way. So great.
Yeah, and it was part of our architecture going forward was an API first architecture. So everything that we were developing and how we were developing our architecture was based off of how we could reutilize what we were developing so that we weren't developing something for an internal facing app and then making that available through a RESTful service. Instead, we were developing it with both applications at the same time.
Great. The next piece, and you talked about this, is having that destination site, a place where your developers can get the information they need to be successful. We'll talk about that again in a minute too. And then the ability to enable your developers and support them as they need it. So great API products. We talked a bit about this just now. Finding that early product market fit and figuring out how to leverage that success beyond that first customer and then use that success to inform other APIs. How did you move from this first partner integration with that first API product into other adjacencies?
I guess kind of two things. Because what we did is we spun up that initial product for that initial line of business, and then there were multiple partners that were in that line of business, so we were able to take that product and then market it to them as well. And then the other thing is that there was a full life cycle to our products and services. So I guess there was two pieces to it. So one was to take that initial product and expand the full life cycle to it, and then the other was then to expand what we had done into the other additional lines of businesses.
Cool. And so to get back to the fundamentals of this great API developer portal, one of the key bits here is onboarding, and I think onboarding and self-service both speak to, while they weren't. In your story, you described how your ability to engage with Apigee to create your own account and to have that self-service, that's such a powerful way to interact and drive that first realization of the value of the product. And I think that applies to developer portals as well. You mentioned documentation and examples and use cases, the success stories that come along with that. I think I can imagine how, and we'll give you a chance to show what you've built with the developer portal for Palomar Specialty. But I think what I would expect you to do as you evolve that is to show the successes that some of your partners have had, just to encourage and be that social proof for others. Is that something you're thinking about?
Yeah. I mean, it's a combination of that, and I mean, we talk about this as a team as well. So we have several, since we initially launched with our existing partners, we have several projects that we have in line with them, as well as a whole bunch of new partners that we're in the process of implementing too. And it is necessary to continually to communicate with everyone who's in process. Just because naturally each one of our partners, they have their own IT strategies, they have their own IT resources, and they have their own IT projects. And there's a possibility that for one partner, another project could take priority over our project with them, and those resources could go away. So the ability to check in with those resources, to check in with who's hitting the developer portal, how often they're hitting it, if they're seeing any errors, and then just checking in with people to say, hey, how's everything going? We've released another API. If you guys have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to us. So continuing to market and communicate with the developers that you're in the process of is super important.
Cool. Do you want to take this time to show what you built with your developer portal today, Britt?
Sure.
Fire up that screen share.
All right. So portalservices.palomarspecialty.com. Basically, two places to jump off of right away. Get Started walks you through the process of how you can utilize our APIs. So the first thing that we do is, since we're a partner distribution model, there's some things that go into that. In our particular vertical, we want to know who's going to be working with our system, and that's super important to us. So we have them contact us directly, either through email or through a phone call to Ivan. Once they get in contact with us, Ivan will send them a username and password, and then you just step through a process of creating a token. You click back into exploring the APIs, you select an API, you can review the request body, the response, you click on try this API, and then you insert the token that you received, and you click execute, and you will see here's your request body. This is what your sample request looks like, and then this is what your sample response will be.
Cool. So what I think is interesting about this is that even though you're not fully self-service today, I mean, I totally understand why you began with this sort of more cautious approach to onboarding new customers. It makes total sense given where you're at in the journey. I mean, I think you brought this up earlier that the ability to focus the conversation during your discussions that happen in person or in conference calls to discuss the strategic opportunity that the two companies have to work together. Having that page that shows everything you need to understand how this will work in practice and whether it satisfies the use case, I think it's a great story how you've managed to collapse your business onboarding, your partnership onboarding down to 15 minutes. I think that's fabulous. Is there anything else you want to show us on the portal, or can we go back to the deck, Britt?
Yeah, if we could go back to the deck, that'd be fun.
So, in a nutshell, step 1, understand your audience. 2, build a unified portal for all. I'll explain about that in a second. 3, figure out your onboarding process, and as you learn, figure out how to scale that business over time. And then there's this constant learning from usage and improving. So we'll walk through this over the next couple of slides. The first is understand your audience. I imagine, Britt, you did learn some things from that first strategic partner that really informed how you delivered the services that they need. Is there anything you can talk about in that area? Like what surprised you from that you hadn't anticipated?
I think a couple of the things as we started to step through the sequencing diagrams, and as we decided, okay, we wanted to blow through all of our processes and through all of the APIs, how we wanted to expose our APIs and how we wanted to sequence those communications. Having the proxy built into that so that we could take what would have been, if we would have just went with our existing services layer, we would have had about 14 calls back and forth, and it would have got really messy. And so the ability to utilize the proxy layer within there was super important to us. And then, of course, the documentation. I mean, I think those two things are our biggest takeaways.
So let me make sure I understand this. So you say you had 14 different systems to orchestrate with, but instead of exposing the complexities of the implementation you have behind the scenes, you were able to use the API layer to simplify and deliver a very use case oriented service that abstracted that. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's right. Once Mark, our senior architect, started utilizing the proxy layer for the kind of combining the APIs together, there was, when we were expanding our Pega platform into different things like document production, document management, single sign-on SAML, those different types of kind of behind-the-scenes services that we utilize, we were also able to utilize the Apigee proxy layer for that too, just to make those communications so much cleaner and so much more manageable.
Cool, thanks. The second piece here is to consider your strategy for an API portal. We often see this progression where an API may begin as an internal service, and then if it's useful enough and you see these opportunities to work externally with partners, it may grow into that, and possibly even to be opened up to external third parties that you don't yet know. This isn't the only way to go, and sometimes, I think it sounds as if, Britt, you identified that partner was the opportunity up first, and even though you probably have internal services, the real strategic opportunity for you is around partners. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Ideally, if that audience changes over time, it's great. There's a lot of virtuous cycle you get from having the same consumer experience for internal and external developers, but we've often come across API programs where they're really thinking about their internal, sort of their services mesh, and they want to keep that isolated from their external services that have a longer lived contract. So there isn't one right answer necessarily. I think ideally, if you can give your external developers the same experiences that your internal developers have, you're just encouraging this good behavior. It's kind of dog fooding. We talked a bit about streamlining the onboarding experience. I think it seems to me that the biggest barrier to working with Palomar Specialty today is that first business relationship, and that's the thing that takes the most amount of time. And I think given what you've described, that's totally appropriate. How far out do you imagine you might have a more self-service model, Britt?
Continually. We're an agile-related development process, and as we release new APIs, we'll continue to update our development portal, and that will continue to grow.
Cool. I think there's one aspect that is accounted for in here too, which is that time to first request. Like from the moment where you have credentials and you're on the site looking at the documentation, the ability to make that request from those docs and to try and see an actual response. That's a really powerful moment that I think it's one of the first major engagements between a consumer and a provider.
Absolutely.
So I think that seems like that's working really well for you.
Yeah, for sure. That's where I think that is such a confidence gainer. When you're in the meetings, it's a very powerful moment.
I can imagine. The next piece is, there's always this, particularly as you're in the discovery phase and finding that product market fit, it's so important to understand how your customers are using those APIs. Did you anticipate their use cases properly? What are you learning from the questions that are inbound as people need support? How do you take what you learn through talking to customers as well and pair that with information like web metrics around the instrumentation of your developer portal to understand how that pipeline is converting and use that to enhance the developer experience? Are you using web metrics today, like something like Google Analytics on your portal, or is this something you're hoping to add in the future, Britt?
Yeah, that would be something that we'll add in the future. I mean, today what we'll do is we'll run some existing reports across our developer environment to take a look, but that's about the extent of it today. But yeah, that is something that we're looking at doing in the future.
Cool. And all of this comes down to having good tools to create these great developer experiences. If you haven't tried the Apigee developer portal that is built into Apigee Edge, I would recommend taking it for a spin. We launched some new features in terms of API documentation and account management at the end of January, and it's pretty exciting to see how you're using API documentation today. Britt, thanks for showing that. I think of this as there are three major components to a developer portal. First and foremost, like, it's not a portal if it doesn't have an API catalog. You can't find and discover the products that consumers are meant to use. So as a consumer, if I'm going there trying to find a solution to a business problem I have, I need to be able to quickly discover what might solve that for me and then to understand how it works. The second piece is that there's always a bunch of supporting content that has to accompany that. And it's not just like the how-tos or the quick starts. It includes like the branding. This is your API program is a reflection of your business beyond just the API, and to be able to express your corporate identity alongside and framing all of the content and the catalog that comes with it is the second piece. So first we have the API catalog. Second, we have this content management system that's fully stylable. And the third piece is that self-service and engagement bit. How do you empower developers to decide what products they would like to adopt, to engage with you as a service provider? These are the three main pieces. It comes down to catalog, content, and that relationship management. Let me give you all a quick glimpse into how this works. We saw, Britt, what you've done, the results of what you've done using the API portal, but just to help people understand how that happened, I'll show you all what the administrative interface looks like. So here is a pretty vanilla, out-of-the-box developer portal, just to give a sense of the sort of basic structure that we set you off with. You can see that there are these major areas for the management interface for creating and building out your developer portal. First and foremost, the ability to theme. I'll show you what that looks like. We give you some quick ways that Google built this fabulous design language called material design. We use that in order to make it a whole lot easier to deliver the functionality that your customers need. And this comes along with a bunch of basic styles that you can switch between. So we give you some primary colors and accent schemes, the ability to decide which fonts you're going to use, and how you'd like to style those and control your logo. But this is mostly just to get you started down the path of imagining what this experience could be like. As you go deeper, you have the ability to override some of the variables in the material theme, or even to add your own CSS styles. The next major component here is the content itself. How do you write, for instance, in Markdown, the information that you need? How do you quickly write and maintain all of that content for customers? And because Markdown is a superset of HTML, if you want to do fancier things that require HTML, you can write that in here as well. There's the ability to upload assets. Like if you have images, you actually look like you've made great use of this in terms of walking people through the process of understanding how to use the interactive documentation. So when you have screenshots to add or sample code that you would like to upload, you can manage that through your assets. There are tools for managing the information architecture, so you can change the menuing system. And the last big piece here is the ability to publish APIs. So the idea that you can take the API products that you've built using Apigee's management interface and take an open API specification and use that to drive the documentation, and we'll go back and look at the end result of that here. So this is simply taking the U.S. Patent Office's Open API v3 spec, and you can see as you click through, we take this YAML-based syntax and we render out full HTML documentation that enables developers to try and get started quickly. That's a quick overview of the capabilities of the Integrated Developer Portal. So that takes us to the end of the content, and it looks like we've had a bunch of questions come in. We have some time left to be able to cover those. So let's see, Britt, I think this first one is for you. What parameters would you recommend considering for selecting an API management platform based on your experience?
The biggest things that we were looking for was the security, the versioning, because it's before you had an API management platform, you had the ability where you could get stuck in some support scenarios with some legacy APIs. So having the versioning was super important to us. The cloud ready, of course, the scalability, caching, queuing, and then of course the proxy services.
Cool. Thanks. The next question here is, what's the best practices for FAQ, forums, and blogs in particular? That's a great question. I think it's really important to consider the needs of your audience. So, for example, are you expecting to have enough of a draw in your ecosystem, particularly at the beginning, to be able to drive your users to have conversations on your site? I've seen a lot of people answer yes to that question and discover that that's not necessarily true. I think consider carefully whether it's better to engage with those people where they are already, whether that's on Stack Overflow, whether they're in other discussion forums. I think it's great to have a presence in those places. And if you're really seeing signs of traction there, maybe you do have the ability to command an audience and drive that conversation on your site. Similarly with blogs, I mean, I myself lament that RSS wasn't more successful, but things like Blogger and Medium emerged as these blogging platforms, and they made subscribing really easy. So before you head down the path of having a blog running on your own site on its own little island, consider whether you should be publishing in these mediums like Medium, so that the audience can get it in the environment that they're expecting it. I mean, even we as Apigee sometimes publish some of our content to Medium for this very reason. In terms of FAQs, that's a trickier one. There's always an art to it, but the things that people frequently ask are obvious candidates for those frequently asked questions list. This is always a fine balance. Like how do you build that knowledge base to enable people to self-serve their own support needs and to share that knowledge? Again, I think it's an art in and of itself. I see another question here in terms of product categorization best practices. Again, this is a tricky one, and often it depends on what kind of an API program you're running. If you're running an internal API program where services are being stood up, possibly microservices, as really discrete units of functionality that are shared among teams internally, you can see your numbers of APIs balloon to 1,000 or 3,000 or 10,000. That has a very different problem in terms of categorization and search and discovery. When you have smaller numbers of APIs, and I think keep in mind if you've got a large set of unknown developers, the last thing you want to do is overwhelm them with too many API products so that they have to wade through the forest of API products to find the thing they're looking for. And so I think there's this fine balance to strike between those two things. One of the things that can help is using mechanisms to tag or categorize your APIs so that logically they can be grouped in ways that may help people navigate it. But again, this is a really tricky situation, and there's no one-size-fits-all solution. Next question is the integrated developer portal that comes out of the box with Apigee Edge versus Drupal 7 or Drupal 8 potentially. Drupal 7 has been the workhorse for Apigee's developer portals for many years. We introduced the integrated developer portal because we saw a lot of customers who wanted to learn more quickly and launch faster. Drupal is great for creating a deeply customized developer experience. What I recommend these days is to start with an integrated portal, understand your product market fit better, and then decide what kinds of custom functionality are worth building to you. And if you're willing to take on that bigger total cost of ownership, Drupal may be a great fit. I'll just touch on, this isn't a webinar specifically about Drupal, but I'll touch on Drupal 7 to Drupal 8. Drupal 8 has gotten some traction. It is the successor to Drupal 7. Drupal 7 has still a long time to life. It's estimated to continue through 2021. And Drupal 8 is on the horizon. We have a version of our Drupal-based portal for Drupal 8 in beta, and look forward to more information on that over the next couple of months.
One other quick to Curtis's question. The RBA, so we utilized Apigee Edge to develop our portal, and it was actually RBA Ivan that developed the entire portal. It was super easy for him to use and do.
Well, that's great. I mean, I think it's going to come down to your strategy about what is the depth of experience control you need to have in the end. Drupal is amazingly powerful. It's a great content management system, but it can be a lot to bite off too. The last question I think we can take here now is how to integrate an API spec repository with the developer portal. I'm not entirely sure what do you mean in terms of these two differentiators, but I'll talk about this a bit. Like there's a specification tool built into Apigee Edge to be able to edit and collaborate on specs, and that serves as the kind of spec repository for your working specification documents. How you then choose to publish those to your API catalog is really how you finesse the difference between the services that are in development or that are moving targets with the longer-lived contracts. Like you can't go changing API designs once consumers are using them in the same way, and so that's a much more mindful, iterative process at that point. And I think that's all the time we have for questions.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Marsh. I appreciate your time, Britt. Thanks for sharing all the knowledge and experience with us. With that, I have a couple other notes before we close out the webcast. If you found this interesting, we also have an upcoming webcast on monitoring your APIs on February 28th, so make sure to join us. The link to register for that is in your resources console. And of course, the right product always helps. Like Marsh said, if you haven't tried Apigee Edge or the Apigee Developer Portal, get started with a free trial. And we also have a number of resources to follow up on this topic. We have a really good ebook on creating great developer experiences that's also available in your resources console. We have a number of other customer success stories. And also, if you haven't taken our Compass survey yet, to make sure to do that. That gives you a good number of where you are with your API strategy. And then last but not the least, if you haven't heard about this, Google Cloud Next is going to be hosted on April 9th through 11th at the Moscone Center in San Francisco. This is a must-attend event for everyone who's in IT to learn more about what's happening in the cloud, APIs, microservices, and a number of other topics. Apigee will be there, so make sure to join us. With that, I would like to thank you all for your time, and we appreciate your time. Have a great day. Thanks for joining us.